Joining us now on the program, as he does each and every week, to talk about the latest in the markets and the economy, both here in Michigan and across the U.S., is Michael Greiner, an assistant professor of management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. Michael, thanks for being with us.
It's great to be back, Tyler. Happy Friday.
Yeah, glad to have you on the show today. Happy Friday to you as well. Let's start off here in our local area in Metro Detroit. We've talked this week with a couple of real estate experts on both the commercial side and on the residential side. Here in Metro Detroit, some interesting news in the commercial real estate market. While there's a lot of interest in the Metro Detroit area, there's still a high vacancy rate amongst commercial properties here in our local area. Talk about that metric right now and just what that disconnect may be between the interest in coming to this area and people actually going for some of those properties.
Yeah, I was just looking at the data some more this morning, and it's kind of scary a little bit. For the Detroit metro area right now, our vacancy rate is 11.39%, and we had a big increase of, I believe, almost 4% compared to pre-COVID, and that puts us at this point 19th out of 134 metro areas in terms of vacancy rate. So we're talking a pretty high vacancy rate, especially when compared with the rest of the country, and we've got a couple of things going on right now in the commercial real estate market. Of course, on the one hand, you've got what's kind of essentially a recession going on in real estate right now, largely driven by the fact that you have had these increases in interest rates. Now, that recession hasn't impacted residential real estate the way it has in commercial real estate, for the simple fact that we've got a shortage in residential real estate in this country. There's a lot of pent up demand right now. So as a result of that, even though you're seeing less construction, higher mortgage interest rates, and that type of thing, people are still buying homes, and so that's and people are still renting apartments, and so that's been driving up the cost of those things anyway. What you're seeing with the commercial real estate, though, is a very different picture, for the simple fact that technology has changed, and we've seen that especially come true after the experience that we had with the COVID pandemic. More people are working at home. We now have things like Dropbox and OneDrive and Zoom, like we're on right now. And people are able to meet virtually and really have entire work relationships as if they're at the office, when really they're working from home, as we all know. And so we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in the amount of people working from home. And of course, what that means then is fewer people in the big office buildings in downtown areas, whether it be in Detroit or Troy or Southfield or wherever in this area. And as a result of that, we're seeing higher vacancy rates at the same time as a lot of these commercial landlords are dealing with the fact that the interest rates are going up, so they're having trouble refinancing what they need to, and there's a big chunk of commercial real estate that needs to be refinanced in the next year or so. And then on top of that, you've got the situation happening with these mid-sized banks, like we had Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank, and what's going on with Republic Bank right now. These banks tend to be big lenders in the commercial real estate area. So that's making it harder for them to get loans. And then on top of that, you've got the whole situation happening in retail, where more and more the brick and mortar retailers are not doing so well because of competition from online retailers. And as a result of that, the commercial real estate market right now is in big trouble. And as I say, right now in Detroit, we're certainly feeling it.
So is that more on the office space side or on the retail side? Are there differences in those two areas?
There are, but they're related, because of the fact that a lot of the time, it's considered a single market essentially. Although there are distinctions within it. Certainly there's certain space that can be used for either office space or retail space and can be changed relatively quickly. One of the things that we've seen happening has been a move toward perhaps trying to change some commercial real estate into being residential. We're seeing that, for example, in New York, where still among apartments there's very high demand, but with commercial real estate they're doing even worse than we are here in Detroit, where a lot of people basically are not coming into the city anymore to do their jobs. And what they found is it's incredibly difficult to do that, because of the fact that you've got these much different standards when you're building something for residential real estate than when you're building something for commercial real estate. And those standards really aren't easy to shift. It's much easier to shift when you're, say, shifting from, say, a retailer to an office space. And we saw that, for example, with WeWork and a lot of these kind of co-working spaces out there, where they're able to take buildings that might not necessarily have been originally intended for office space and are relatively easy to change into office space. But when you start talking about trying to change it into residential real estate, it's a much more difficult situation.
We're joined by Michael Greiner on today's edition of the Megacast. He's with Oakland University in their School of Business Administration, where he serves as an assistant professor of management, joining us as he does each and every week to talk about the latest in the markets and the economy. All this being considered, with the current state of the economy, with real estate, both on the commercial and the residential side, having fluctuating prices and going between being a buyer's market and a seller's market. The cost of living in Metro Detroit continues to go up as time goes on, and these conditions are certainly not helping. And there was a really interesting report done with Fox 2 this week here in the Metro Detroit area about what it means to actually be in that middle class category nowadays in Metro Detroit. So where has that definition shifted?
Well, what's interesting is in the city of Detroit in particular, we actually have the second lowest, essentially, entry point for being in the middle class. And what that has to, and the way they calculate what is the middle class, I think is relevant to talk about for 1 second here. And basically what they do is that they figure out the median income per household. So what is the median that's earned? Now, this is not the average, because with an average, you'll see where somebody who has huge income will throw off the average, where it'll seem like, for example, you have much higher income than you really do. Like, for example, if there were a group of us standing in a room and suddenly Jeff Bezos walked into it, suddenly the average income would dramatically increase. The median, though, wouldn't increase by much, because basically that's where you count half is higher, half is lower. And so you may have some real outliers on one end or the other, but they don't throw off that middle number very much. So then what you do is you look at what is 2/3 of that number, that's the low end, and what is essentially double of that number, and that's the high end. So in Metro Detroit itself, the low end, the place where you essentially are considered part of the middle class, is as low as I believe $24,000, which is pretty low. So what that reflects is the fact that the median income in the city of Detroit is very low. That said, though, when you look at Michigan as a whole, the median, the essentially the low point for entry into it is 42,000, and it goes up to $126,996. So a lot of us are who felt like we're in the middle class, probably are in the middle class based upon that number. And the interesting thing about this, though, is it just shows the distinction that you still have in the city of Detroit itself, where you tend to have much, much lower incomes, generally speaking. Again, the median is much lower than you do in the rest of the state. And so it speaks to the fact that still there's a lot of economic development that really needs to be done in the city of Detroit before it really can kind of come back to the essentially the kind of economic activity and really the level of city that it once was.
And as we talk about that, and we're thinking about ways to help that middle class and those that are in the classes, socioeconomic classes below that category also, ultimately that does in some ways come back to tax incentives to help those individuals out, particularly on those property taxes in those lower income or middle class areas. And so this week, some controversy or controversy lately arising in Detroit over tax incentives, particularly for developers and in particular for the very controversial, continuously controversial District Detroit. You have a unique perspective on this, having been a government worker and worked on tax incentives in the past in your career. Give us that perspective on what's going on here and what really is driving that controversy in the District Detroit.
Yeah, and I can totally see where people are coming from with their concerns about this, because they say, hey, these people are billionaires. Why do they need more tax incentives? And of course, we're talking about the Ilitch family and some of the other very wealthy people who've invested in the city of Detroit and deserve a lot of credit for that. But the fact of the matter is that in many of these cases, these investments wouldn't happen if it weren't for these tax incentives. Some of the areas that we're talking about being redeveloped are what are called brownfields. And what that means is that these are areas that were previously developed, but now are basically sitting vacant. And so the question is, can you redevelop them? Well, you would think, you've already got water and sewer and electric and all these advantages of being in the city, you would think it would be easier to redevelop a property in the city than develop a new property out in the suburbs, something that we call the green fields, where they haven't had that prior development. And interestingly enough, kind of surprising to many people, that's just not the case. As it turns out, it's much, much more expensive to redevelop these areas in the city that are considered brownfields than these greenfields. Reason being that there's a lot of remediation that needs to take place. You would be amazed some of the stuff that is buried under the ground in Metro Detroit or Warren or Pontiac or any of these cities in this area for that reason, where you're dealing with these older communities. And as a result, whenever these places are going to be redeveloped, there's this whole process that has to be gone through to clear out the property and essentially make it safe for redevelopment. And that is a process that you just don't need to go through when you're dealing with greenfields, these new spaces. So economically, there's an incentive for businesses essentially to construct their properties outside of the city in these greenfields rather than in the older brownfield areas. What's more is you have to remember we're not just competing here in Detroit among different communities in Michigan. We're actually competing in Michigan nationally and even internationally when we're talking about some of these incentives on a national basis. My former boss used to talk all the time about the fact that during the Depression, there was the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was basically paid for in large part by taxes from states like Michigan. But what it did is it made it so that states down south were able to get much, much less expensive energy and electric than we're able to get here in Michigan. The result has been that a lot of businesses have decided, hey, we're going to move down south. And a big justification for that is the fact that energy prices are lower down there than they are here. Well, in many cases, we're the ones who finance that. And you can see where that gets frustrating. So we're in this competition among other states where we need to offer some kind of financial incentive to say to them, hey, even though there might be this advantage on the energy side, there's still an economic benefit to locating here in Michigan. And then finally, we're dealing with a global competition right now, as we well know. We've certainly been exposed to the fact that businesses now can move to China, they can move to Vietnam, they can certainly move to Mexico and even Canada. And each of these places offers certain benefits economically to the businesses to locate there. So again, we need to be competing on this level. So on the one hand, I can see where people are concerned about, tax incentives going to the very wealthy. But on the other hand, I also, again, from the perspective of the communities, and this was something that, despite concerns of residents, was passed by an 8-1 vote at the Detroit City Council, I understand. Because of the fact that they understand that if they don't give these incentives, the investment won't happen at all. And that's much worse for the community than offering some of these incentives. And then something else, too, that I think is a little bit of a misnomer is the fact that when these incentives are offered, they never mean that these businesses will be paying less in taxes. All they mean is that for the new value that they add to the property, that value will be taxed at a lower rate. So there'll still be more taxes coming in. It just won't be coming in at the same rate if there were no tax incentives. And so again, the communities have to look at it from the perspective of, look, we're either going to give these incentives and at least get essentially, half of what we're looking for, as opposed to not giving these incentives and getting nothing. And that can be a big risk that these communities run. So generally speaking, these incentives are a very valuable tool that most communities have. And again, as you say, when I worked for the city of Warren, we certainly were aggressive in offering them, and they were very valuable to us.
And lastly, Michael, as we're trying to attract new businesses to Michigan, new people to Michigan, something that the state's been receiving a lot of praise for in that regard is their incentives, particularly as they're attracting climate investment here in the state of Michigan. Let's talk about that for a moment and just what sort of incentives are being offered that are so enticing to people outside of Michigan to come into the Great Lakes state.
Yeah, and that's a great question because again, it speaks to just what we were talking about, which is that In Michigan, we're involved in a national competition for these investments. We're also involved in a global competition. And the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed by Congress a year or so ago, is probably one of the most poorly named statutes in history. It was named that way for politics, and we don't need to get into all that. But fundamentally, what this legislation is it was a climate piece of legislation. And the way that it's trying to address the climate issue is by offering tax incentives to get businesses to essentially invest in climate related businesses here in the United States. Okay, so on a national scale now, we're much more competitive relative to other countries. And I just saw another article actually this morning talking about how Europe, where you would think that they'd be far ahead of the United States with some of these climate businesses, given the fact that number one, they have a little bit more of a history of it than we do. Number two, with the war in Ukraine going on, there's been this incredible push to kind of get Europe to back away from fossil fuels, which of course are supplied by Russia, and to look to alternative forms of energy. But actually, what we've seen is that despite this history there, and despite this push for cleaner energy, much of it is being shifted to the United States. And again, this has to do with the fact that we are being aggressive in offering these incentives here. So then once we're able to get these businesses to locate to the United States, then it becomes this competition between different states. And I can tell you, some of the states that are very aggressive in offering tax incentives to get businesses to locate there include such southern states as Georgia and North Carolina, which again already have that advantage because of the fact that we paid for them to be able to deliver cheap electricity. But third in line among all the states in terms of offering tax incentives is Michigan, because we understand that there is this global competition and this competition among the states to see where businesses are going to locate. And as a result, we're offering over $2 billion of incentives to get businesses to locate here. And there's already a pretty strong indication that has attracted some clean investments here to Michigan, because the one thing we can't forget is we do have one real advantage here. And what that has to do is the fact that we have an educated workforce. We have people who know how to build cars, we have a high percentage of automotive and energy engineers who understand how this works. And so that ends up being a real advantage to locating here in Michigan. We've got the people who know how to do this stuff. And if we're able to essentially, kind of narrow that gap, that financial gap that you may see between here and some of the other states or other countries, then I think we provide a very attractive package for a lot of businesses to locate here. And we're really starting to see that start to pay some dividends.
Well, Michael, we appreciate you giving us some insight on all these different topics of interest, certainly here in Michigan, on the economic side, on the socioeconomic side, and on incentives trying to get more people into the state of Michigan, more businesses here to drive our economy going forward. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing your take on the everything going on in the NFL right now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the Lions go from here after a very interesting first night of the NFL draft. Thank you so much.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. Thank you very much, Michael.
Have a good one.